All right, welcome everybody. Today we have a awesome guest with us today. Actually, all of them have been awesome so far. We have National Master Bryan Tillis joining us today for Interview Thursday, filling in as we had a last minute change. So thank you so much, Bryan. I really appreciate you being here tonight. And go ahead and tell us about who you are and what it is you do.
Absolutely. I wear a lot of hats in Florida Chess. Currently, the vice president of the Florida Chess Association and owner and founder of Palm Beach Chess, and I guess the stream, and a national master, and a full time educator, certified, teaching at Franklin Academy in Palm Beach Gardens. So, lot of different hats.
And author for Chessable as well.
Oh yeah, author. See, I can't even remember all the bullet points.
I'll help you out there, no problem. All right, and he was the one who coined this entire series of psychology of competition. And what better way to go ahead and get into the mind other than with somebody who understands psychology very deeply? So, Bryan, what is it you will be showing us today?
Well, I have prepared three games, and depending upon how we're able to go through the games, how fast, we may have three full games to look at. But I've got a game that we're about to look at where opening selection was a big part of the psychology of competition.
Mhm.
And I'll talk a good bit about how, I mean, my philosophy of chess, especially as a Chessable author, revolves around the opening and building your game from a ground up perspective. And we'll see in all three games, openings played a factor in my choices that I made. And also, we will look at a game that deals with resilience. Sometimes your opponent just won't break. So, what do you do when you're faced with an opponent that just isn't blundering? They're not going away. How do you put away that opponent? So, I think it'll be good.
All right, and these all these tournaments have been from your experiences throughout life. What is it that got you into chess in the first place?
So, I actually learned how the pieces moved around 5 years old, and my brother taught me. And after that, I did not pick the game back up until eighth grade, so 14, 15 years old. And I remember spring break that year playing on Yahoo Chess
Oh gosh.
and just getting up all day, every day, and playing games on there. And I took a great interest to the game. And my mother found in the local newspaper that there was a chess club that met every Tuesday night, which is why we meet on Tuesday nights now.
Mhm.
And I joined the club, and the rest is history. I showed up to that club nearly every Tuesday for the better part of a decade.
All right. And when you were in school or even college, when you had to travel to these tournaments and so on, what was it that drove you to go ahead and uh, make the commitment?
Well, I, I think the easy answer is for the love of the game. And for me personally, I've always been a goal oriented person, and I set goals, lofty goals, as soon as I really got engaged with chess, that I wanted to be a master, I wanted to be a state champion, and I was really pressing for those goals. And that's what kept me going, especially in my home state of Alabama.
All right. Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm very excited to go ahead and get started here on your games. So, tell us more about the first one and which tournament was this, what year, and so on.
Let's see. This game happened in May of 2015 in Palm Beach Gardens
Mhm.
at the Palm Beach Chess Club. And I'm playing against Robert Lachusi, who's roughly about 1900 USCF. And he has white. And the opening itself, and the reason I chose this, when you're playing in a club and you feel that you're going to have to play against the same opponent over and over, I'm typically not going to show my best stuff or like my main line opening. I'm typically going to be flexible. And this opening choice definitely revolves from I wanted to play an opening to feel out my opponent's strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and jump right in. And
All right. Were you playing as black here?
I was black.
All
So,
right.
yep,
Let's go ahead and switch up the orientation real quick. And there we are. Okay.
good to go. All right.
Yes.
So I choose what looks like a perk. And I mean, I know if Jan's watching, he'll be happy. But as soon as we get to this point, I decide to go off the beaten path. And after working with Grandmaster Akobian in Atlanta, he has a specialty system, and he's probably the highest rated player in the world who plays it on a regular basis. And it's the check system or the check perk. And it was something that up until seeing Akobian's games, I wasn't familiar with it. And at the time, I mean, I was a 2100 rated player. So if a well-researched openings fanatic hadn't seen a particular line, of course it's going to get my interest, and I'm going to start really, really looking into it. And after seeing how much effort, like little effort, I should say, that Akobian was putting to win games and
Right.
such dynamic positions he was getting, I was all over it. And I recently completed an entire opening series on this on the Palm Beach Chess Patreon page. So F4, and this is the most critical variation of the check perk, and it's that Austrian attack style structure for white. So the main themes of playing this opening is understanding when and when not to capture, and then the dynamics of this extremely fluid center.
Okay.
But black has to have a critical move here. Otherwise, he is already worse. And that critical move is a bit odd by chess standards, queen a5, because we're told don't bring the queen out early. But often this is a misevaluated statement because it's not complete. Don't bring the queen out early if she can be attacked, if you're losing time by bringing her out. So that's the full statement. And the queen on a5, it's really not being punished right now.
Right.
And that's a major takeaway.
And it's the square that she normally sits on in Scandinavians and stuff.
And yeah, absolutely. It's a flexible square. You see it also in, say, like the Cambridge Spring Slav.
Mm-hmm.
And we're making an immediate threat here. And I can't tell you how often in bullet games I'll see a move like knight f3 here, as it's a natural enough looking move. And then we're going to snack that pawn, knight takes e4, due to this pin.
Yeah.
So my opponent sees that threat and parries it pretty easy. And now I play e5 to go ahead and hit this dynamic center.
Right.
And I can't remember all the theory exactly with this, but it's a situation that you have to know no matter how white takes, you're okay. And you do that homework beforehand so you can figure it out over the board in a practical game.
Okay.
Say, for instance, if D takes e5 here and I capture back, my first reaction is not to capture with the queen where I feel I'm going to be losing time, but it is to play knight g4, and I want to capture back the pawn with the knight where it's blockaded, and white has an isolated pawn for the long term. So this is how quickly the center can dissolve in a negative way.
Right.
And if an opponent has never seen this type of game, there's so many pitfalls like this where you can get a worse position with white just by not having a good knowledge of the position.
Okay. And so, when you were playing against your opponent, did you feel that your opponent was already out of prep by this point?
Oh, no. I mean, I felt that my opponent handled the position very well. He's playing critical moves. And I mean, honestly, you question your opening choice because I play it as a surprise, and it's not much of a surprise. So at this point, you are pot committed playing risky opening. So you just have to do the best you can. And it's one of those things that I often see with my students, that if something goes wrong for them, they focus on the mistake. But you have to have a presence in the moment that you're in to really just let that go immediately and play the best chess that you can,
Right.
with always the perspective of, I need to press to win this game.
Yeah.
And my opponent plays a flexible move with knight f3, no commitment with any sort of capture in the center. And I do recall that he was using a large amount of time.
Okay.
So in a game in, I believe it was game in 75, that's not a tremendous amount of time for every move. And I'm comfortable. I'm making quick moves because I understand any liquidation of the center is going to be fine for me.
Okay.
So he adds pressure to the center. I simply play knight bd7 and take that pressure off. Now, after bishop d2, there are some potential discoveries at this point. Say, for instance, if I played bishop e7, knight d5 would come, and I don't necessarily want to trade my bishop.
Okay.
It's going to be an open position. It's going to be dynamic. So that's why I simply play queen c7. This is not the best square for the bishop. So the bishop is going to have to move again in the future. So the stutter step with the queen is kind of necessary.
Okay.
And also notice the retreat of the queen is still keeping an eye on the center, which is the main focal point of the position.
And that on that same note about putting your queen initially to a5, it was to potentially put the bishop on a bad square on d3 too. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, the bishop on d3, it can be strong.
Okay.
If it is allowed to get open. Much like you'll see in, say, the French defense or Caro-Kann, a strong bishop on d3 attacking the king side could be a monster. But
Right.
notice what we immediately do in putting a pawn on e5,
Mhm.
restraining that bishop's eye towards the king side, where our king is naturally going to be castling.
Gotcha. Okay.
So moving forward, castles, and another natural move, bishop e7. And my opponent so far is showing that he has a good understanding of this position.
Mhm.
And here is where he starts to go a little bit off the beaten path. And I mean, I was expecting a move like queen g3 or queen h4 and just activating the lady, just because, the bishops are pointing towards the king. You have to attack. Knight e2 was played, and I think this is a little bit too much in regards to waiting, because I still have a few moves to complete development, especially because of my queen stutter step. So I'm going to make the most of this extra time now. Rook e8 and a flexible move, mostly because we're seeing how this rook is now getting lined up to deal with what's going on in the center.
Mhm.
And this bishop could very easily drop back at any point in time to add protection to the king, as well as be in a situation where that rook's eye just really opens up. And that's a theme you often see in multiple openings with this bishop on e7, like, say, the Breyer Lopez, or I mean, even in hedgehog positions.
Oh, okay.
So after rook e8, c3, and
Very solid.
I actually have this in the notes now. This is a strong position, and for me as a natural player, I played the natural follow-up, which is bishop f8. But there's actually a much stronger move here that the engine points out immediately, and black can turn the tables and be much better right now. So it's kind of a shocking move because it's so counterintuitive that unless you know the theory here, it's not going to be a move that is easy to find.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
d5. And the first threat being, if e takes, we have e4 with this fork. So it's all on the premise that knight has left c3. And the other natural move, f takes e5, is actually still met with the same idea. And what we end up getting is this knight takes move, which is the exclam. This Wishenzoog is so strong.
Mm-hmm.
We have queen b6, and black has the better of it here as we're getting our piece back. We have liquidated this super strong center that white had, and we have very, very easy development for the rest of the game. So
That's a hard
that's
one to
how
see.
quick. Yeah, I mean, it's a dirty tactic, 11 d5. But of course, I didn't see it.
I mean, it's still okay move.
Oh yeah, bishop f8. It goes along with the plan.
Yeah.
And that's really the only blemish on this game. Otherwise, and I like to be hypercritical in my own analysis of my games,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's so important for especially young players when improving. You have to focus on your mistakes and really look at where you and your opponent went wrong for objective analysis. Do not just annotate the game as, well, I could have done better here. Always look at it as how both you and your opponent could have played much better chess during analysis.
Okay.
So moving forward, speaking of that, this is the key moment that white went wrong, and then the rest of the game, black was in the driver's seat. In the game, white played d takes e5. But much stronger than that is the natural f takes e5. We're getting a pawn out of the way for the rook potentially. And after d takes, queen h4, since this bishop has now vacated e7 and there's no discoveries, white has some pull here in the position. So this is definitely the way that white should have played and would have had a mild advantage.
Okay.
But in the main game, d takes e5, and I believe already my opponent was starting to feel the effects of time trouble. In he made all these moves building the wall instead of pressing a huge attack. So in making a decision to commit, he used even more time.
Wow.
D
move
takes
12
E.
in time trouble? Yikes.
And then b4. And we're now in the territory of a master playing against a 1900 rated player. And we're both out of theory and preparation. So we begin the technical phase of the game, really looking at this point, white's jumbled. So how can I improve my position without improving his, essentially? And I want to continue to leave the tension in the center because, I mean, it's not often you see a clump of minor pieces like this and it's good in chess. So it's a question often of where should I be playing? Well, I understand that playing in the center is going to help white. If I'm moving pawns around my king or trying to open my king up, that doesn't make sense. So then it turns my attention to the queen side. And this move b4 I saw as a potential problem after the move a5. Because if I can get this pawn to move, I'm going to be able to claim key squares. And on top of it, compare the rooks in the event of pawn capture. The a1 rook is purely defensive, and the a8 rook is now magically developed and it is aggressive piece just by simply getting the a pawn out of the way. We gotta love that. Gotta love it.
Right.
So here, my opponent closes the position down with f5, and this is a poor technical decision as it shuts the door on his potential counterplay. I mean, it may look good getting the space and potentially shutting out this bishop, but g4 isn't going to come. And a move like queen h4, you don't have enough firepower with my knight and bishop over here to be able to break through. So black is completely safe. So that means I will have a free hand now that the center is locked and I don't have to worry about the king side on the queen side.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. You saying you feel completely safe makes me feel completely uncomfortable because I'm thinking space. Oh no, I'm gonna get smushed.
Right, and that's why I point that out is that initially, if you haven't played these types of positions where you get attacked a lot, you don't have a sense for, oh, I'm completely fine here. And here, like I said, it's the clump. How can you get all of the pieces to harmonize? I mean, even if he gets in queen g3 and bishop h6, you still have the bishop on f8.
That's true.
So it's like any type of attack you try to fantasize white having, and you can give him a few extra moves. It's really going to take a good number of moves before anything devastating can happen. And in the
Okay.
meantime, I'm going to get my counterplay.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of
And
sense.
here, speaking of counterplay, c5. And I want a key square. One way or another, I'm going to get a key square.
Mm-hmm.
B takes a5. And now I wanted that c5 square for a knight. So we have the nice in-between move here.
Mm-hmm.
And rook takes a5. So the engine liked the immediate knight c5, but I had a particular plan of development in mind with rook takes a5, which wasn't frowned upon by the machine.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go ahead and keep going here. White starts trying to get organized on the king side because it's clear that black has a huge amount of initiative on the queen side. So it's all or nothing for white at this point.
Right.
You either break black's king side structure or you're losing. And this next move I really, really liked because it just harmonizes the position perfectly for black. And that move is b5. And the key idea is, one, I'm defending this pawn. Two, the knight's going to be able to come to c5. But three, I'm going to be threatening queen a7 check, harmonizing the rook and the queen together to go after this minted weakness.
Mm-hmm. It's
So
such
it
a
just gets
aesthetically nice looking move too.
yeah. It feels good to play a move like b5 just to strengthen that pawn chain.
Mm-hmm.
Queen h4, pressure on the king side. So I follow up with my idea, clip the pawn, and now it's very fluid. All of these moves are at high level by black, and it's understanding that you're completely okay moving this bishop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now this was one of the few times in the game I'm like, okay, he's going all or nothing. And I probably spent 10 minutes calculating. So if you're playing the home game, this is where you could pause the stream and try to figure out what is the most optimal way to just kill the attack.
Yes.
And as soon as you see it, you're good to go.
All right, and thank you, JackCC, for the follow. Really appreciate it. If you have some questions for Bryan here, feel free to go ahead and ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And my phone doesn't seem to be loading the stream properly. So if a question does pop up, Matt, please let me know and I'm happy to answer.
Absolutely.
So clipping the rook is fine. And as soon as this rook moved, I then see this key idea. And it's queen f2. The queen and bishop alone just don't have enough to break through. So
you can't even sacrifice anything.
This knight needed to move. And trading any more, he'll lose the ending. And it's not like you can just move the rook and move my queen away because my queen's going to capture the bishop and I'm threatening mate at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really perfect harmony with this queen f2 move. Very, very annoying. So knight d2 was played. And now this is where more pressure and tension comes up, h6. I'm stopping this rook f1 threat in the most vicious way possible. So it's got a sack. And then after the very simple queen f4, white resigns as there is no attack. All counterplay is done. And then the extra material is going to be quite telling.
It's really incredible to see that. Because I'm just thinking I'm completely dead in the water as black with the attack coming, but just seeing how f5 just actually clamped his own position, can't do anything. Yikes.
and it's an interesting point when you get comfortable with certain positions, and I enjoy close center positions. I mean, after doing Master of the French Defense and being a lifetime King's Indian player,
mm-hmm.
It's closed centers most of the time. So I enjoy the dynamic nature of playing on the wings. And I felt really good about this game and the opening selection after the fact.
Hmm.
Of course, my opponent missed opportunities, but overall, a very respectable effort.
Right. And did
So
you and your opponent
mhm.
have a chance to discuss the game afterward?
I I don't recall if
Okay.
we did. I think this was probably a round two or round three, so we were immediately starting the next game type
Gotcha.
of deal.
Gotcha.
So on to the next one.
Yep.
And this one is going to be I was playing black in this game as well.
Okay. Organization. And go ahead.
And I was playing against Roger Johnson, another 1900 rated player, in the 2013 Alabama State Championship. And as an extra note on psychology, off the board considerations can really affect you. And I had won the state championship of Alabama in 2012. And of course, I'm looking to retain my title. And this was a clutch game towards the end of the tournament. In order to stay in contention, I have to win with black. A draw will not do.
Okay.
So it is always a good question of psychology of competition. I think my opponent played an absolutely perfect opening choice, understanding my tournament situation and my desire to press for a win with black. If you play super solid, that's going to make black have to come to you.
Hmm.
And that's what my opponent did. So I remember this entire game thinking, be objective, keep tension, and keep tension until he breaks.
Okay.
He kept playing so well, but at the end of the day, we are humans. And though the engine will give zeros, there's many different shades of zero. There's many different flavors of zero, if you will. And you got to really enjoy the equal position. And the Ulf Anderson philosophy in School of Chess, if you feel that you cannot lose the position, you should be pressing to try to win it. So let's dive right into this game. And my opponent plays the English against me. And I decided on c5.
Hmm.
And this was an over the board decision because I'd played my opponent in this game a few times. And every time we had played, it had been a different opening. So, probably in retrospect, if you're playing for a win against this structure, I'm more than likely going for a King's Indian.
Okay.
That would be probably my choice today if I was in the same situation again. The symmetrical English isn't exactly going to be the nastiest of opening choices to try to play for a win with black.
Hmm.
And once we get to this point, this is a matter of taste, flavor, technique, whatever. I mean, e6 is a good move here. And I elected to go with g6. So I'm thinking maybe he comes back with g3, and we've transposed into an English position that I play on both sides of the board and I'm very comfortable with.
Okay.
But this next move made me have to go into the tank because I move ordered myself a bit, and now we've transposed into a Maroxy bind dragon position.
Yeah.
So being I had played the accelerated dragon probably 5 years before this, I just had to remember the theory. And I hadn't had a game in this structure in years. Actually, it had been 2 years since I'd had a game in a similar structure. So I had to take some time in the opening, but it's always a question. I've had students ask me, well, if you get in an opening line that you don't know early, do you let your opponent know by using a lot of time and trying to figure stuff out? Or do you play quickly to try to feign confidence? And what do you think, Matt? What would you do in the situation?
Well, I've tried the second one where I try to
Mhm.
feign confidence, and every single time I fall apart because I make a decision that actually doesn't work for me and my style of play. So I probably go with the first one now.
And this is like game in 2 hours. And understanding that I can play pretty much forever with a 5-second delay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be completely comfortable with using, say, 20 minutes of my time to remember things and figure it out. So, bishop g7.
Real quick,
Mhm.
being able to identify that you have just transposed into a different opening, how much is that? How important is that in the game of chess?
Well, that's broad. I'll answer it in the context of the game
Okay.
because in the context of the game, I have to win with black per the tournament situation.
Okay.
And my opponent was able to, by move 6, get to a line which is extremely solid and has an excellent reputation. Like by move 9, white scores say 60% plus in the database. So,
Jesus.
and it's just because it's so solid that, it's water against rock.
Okay.
So the main reason I was choosing this game was very much that adjustment. When you know you got to win, this is a game of how bad do you want it. So let's keep it going.
Okay.
So after bishop g7, knight c2 was played, and this is a flexible move. I think it's another good practical decision, not allowing the trade of pieces. And black doesn't have a plethora of ideas to choose from. So I castle, and then d6. And it should be noted that this was the aforementioned position. White scores roughly 60% plus
Oof.
from this position. And the reason is from a practical standpoint, black really only has one plan. And thankfully, the game that I'd played before this, it was in 2011. I had the structure before and just knew what to do. So I didn't require any thought.
Okay.
But if you don't know the theory here, there's plenty of moves for black, but they'll get you into trouble.
Yeah.
Like, to show a few examples, a lot of times in the structure in the English with black, you'll play rook b8, a6, b5, and play for this type of counterplay. So say, for instance, if a6, white just naturally develops and gets that, Maroczy bind structure.
Mm-hmm.
Queen d2, and after knight e5, he just goes a4, and you got nothing. This is just clearly better for white. And if anything, white has full control and time to be pressing you on the queen side. And this is a worst case scenario. So coming back,
Yeah, I wouldn't know what to do there at all.
the second most popular move is bishop e6. And this seems logical enough. We're looking at the c pawn. White continues with the same development. And this is why this position is so dangerous, is because white can just play natural moves and then sit. And if black's trying to beat you, it puts all of the onus on black. So rook c8 and now queen d2. And if you play a move like knight g4, which is normally liked, he gets the perfect structure that he's looking for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And when you come back, b3, and this is not fun.
Now, to get any sort of counterplay or dynamic chances, I feel like you have to play for maybe f5 or d5. Are those both like terrible plans?
Well, it is a question of he's got d5 on lock. b5 isn't a possibility. So f5 is the only move, and it comes with great risk. And keep in mind, as soon as f5 happens, white either has bishop h6 or, in some variations, bishop d4.
Mm-hmm.
And once he gets rid of your bishop pair, that's the only claim in the position that black could potentially have, is the b pair.
Gotcha.
So that's why knight d7, I believe, is the strongest move.
Okay.
And I'll show you the main line quickly, because I think it's important when studying openings to look at the main line and then go backwards. Because if you understand the main line, it's the main line for a reason. The ideas are most pure from that source. And normally a secondary line is going to still have some of the idea overlap, so you'll know how to handle the position.
Okay.
And the reason you're getting the knight on d7 is he wants the flexibility to come to c5 to hit e4, and that bishop's eye is going to be supporting the f5 push at that point. So understanding the Maroczy bind structure, you hit the nail right on the head with pointing out f5 as a counterplay move. So you have to know that based off of experience. Now, bishop d2 is your main move.
Mm-hmm.
And after knight c5, white doesn't want to give black the time to get in f5. So the absolute main move is b4. And I remembered this position because you're maneuvering without touching the pawns to get key squares.
Mm-hmm.
So now you need to fight over here. So that developed our rook. So that was worth pressing the a pawn. And it should be noted, if white just pushed by, you're getting the c5 square back for the knight.
Right.
So this is probably best play as well. And then we end up getting a position where I've got the bishop pair, and overall, I mean, this is the main line of the position. This is deemed roughly equal. It's a dynamic position for both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I had in my notes at the time. Well, my opponent plays the simple rook b1. Now, how does it relate to the main line? Well, I look at it and I go, okay, I know knight c5 is still a strong move to consider, and he's not going to be playing b4 too quickly because that's going to ruin the protection of that knight. So I'm not quite sure what rook b1 was, other than I'm nervous about this bishop. So to me, that already shows that my opponent, he's being overly cautious against me. And it would make sense based off of our previous games. I believe one of our games was like a miniature, and then the other, it was just a tactical slugfest that was done by move 30. So my opponent does respect me. Okay. And that's why he's playing cautiously. But it's definitely still an excellent opening choice and way to play for white, mm-hmm. because I could so easily overpress here from a psychological standpoint.
So just knowing that you got to be, it's pretty much whoever is more patient will win this one.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, going forward, I'd had a position very similar to this before. If a move like f3 happens, that's when you go f5, okay, as a note. So queen d2 occurred in the game, and he's covering the knight, so maybe he can play b3 and bishop b2. And because I knew the main line here, I was like, well, f5 doesn't feel quite right. So I went with knight e6. And it's an interesting point because here, when I initially analyzed this game in 2013, I was probably using, Fritz like 9 or something at the time. It liked bishop takes c3, and I considered it over the board and then immediately dismissed it within a few seconds because
feels wrong.
I may be getting a pawn, but this position is evaluated as roughly equal by modern engines. Because after, say, rook e8, b3, I mean, as soon as this knight is moved, we're threatening like bishop b2 and queen c3.
Right. And
that's just terribly annoying for a pawn. And where's my counterplay with black? I mean, intuitively, the pawn just wasn't worth it. I need to look for more. Mm-hmm. And that's why I went for knight e6. My opponent continues with his plan. And you can see, because I knew the main line, I was able to find this plan. It's a coiled spring. I'm not developing very easily here. So if I can trade a couple of pieces, mm-hmm. I'll be good to go.
And you had a little tactical threat there too. So kind of.
Oh, absolutely. Got to love that. So bishop d3, he doesn't want to give me the bishop pair, and rightly so. And now I need to figure out how to get all my pieces working, specifically this bishop. So b6, mm-hmm. No hurry. Now, the engine actually doesn't like this move at all, but it is also not a human playing for a win. And this is one of those technical standpoints that I'm going to disagree with the engine, because I felt if I'm able to beat my opponent, I need to keep the knight on the board.
Okay.
Tal said, without knights, there are no tactics, and the man is not wrong. So I refused the trade of knights. And we'll see later, the knight is the reason I end up winning this game.
Okay.
Bishop b2. No way to stop this trade.
Okay.
So I finished development. And we have a dead equal position, and white has this structure. What I want you to notice, though, is in him trading off the bishop, that was his good bishop. Notice the pawn structure. This is a bad bishop, and he's made it worse. My bishop, on the other hand, can attack all these pawns.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a good bishop versus bad bishop dynamic. Queen c7, simply connecting the rooks and finishing development. Now, my dream would be, please, put your knight on d5. I will clip him immediately, and then we have a good knight versus a bad bishop ending. And that is what I'm dreaming of. That's what I'm angling for. I know if I can win this game, that is the path that has the highest chances for me to win.
Interesting. I thought that by capturing there, you would actually be helping the bishop open up. Huh.
It may open up the bishop, but still, all of the pawns are on the same color as the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
Even you can pick your pawn to move. Say after knight d5, we capture.
Mm-hmm.
The bishop's still biting on a wall.
Oh, yeah, and then the F push wouldn't really help much. Okay.
And then say he wants to preserve his bishop.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not too quick to play f5 here, but even, I mean, I look at moves like f6 and g5,
mm-hmm.
put the knight on e5 to where it can't really be kicked out.
Right.
So, again, notice how I'm negotiating the pawn structure against the bishop in these lines.
Jack says white has a tall pawn.
Oh, yes. Definitely a tall pawn. So, rook b to c1. And seeing that my opponent, like f3, solid move, knight c3, but then when he plays rook c1, he's showing that he doesn't have a willingness to attack me or press me. He's just standing solid. So that's when you play a move like check, just to test the water some.
Mm-hmm.
And my assumption was right. My opponent's just like, okay, let's just not make a mistake here. I just want to trade. And when you start developing a defensive mentality,
mm-hmm.
that's when things can start to go wrong for you. Because when he moved his queen, he gave me some space. And now my knight's got just a little bit more play, a little bit more ideas in the position.
Mm-hmm.
And when I chose this game earlier today, like looking at the position, my first reaction now would be g5, like without hesitation. And it's just securing more pawns on the opposite color of the bishop and trying to secure the knight. G3 can't be played because of knight h3.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a provocative move. And that's what I would 100% do now. At the time, I played rook fd8. Nothing wrong with that. But yeah, g5. So king h1 was played, and now I evaluate that even though I'm trying to win, his queen is better than mine. It has more flexibility behind the wall. And with his queen off the board, I will have a free hand with my king in the position.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, and with your idea earlier about the knight, you're hoping he would hop into d5. I mean, I don't even see any good advancement squares for the knight otherwise. It's kind of bad.
And my opponent is going to start suffering from not having a plan here.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw a clear plan for black. And playing against the Maroczy bind, well, I'm not going to be able to play f5. I'm not going to be able to play d5, but b5 is very much a possibility. So in many Sicilians, when you have the static pawn structure,
mm-hmm.
you can go bishop c6, a6, and then b5. You even can play rook b8 if you need to.
Okay.
So I start up with bishop c6. And on g3, I need to react to that. a6, and I accomplished my plan with b5.
Such a slow but simple plan. Wow.
And that's all it takes
Huh.
sometimes. Incremental improvement of your position. My opponent takes, and now compare the position to just, a few moves ago. This pawn and this chain is so strong and beautiful, and these are non-factors.
Mm-hmm.
And then we jump forward to when I capture. Now I've got open files for my rooks. That pawn's weak, and my b pawn is now a point of strength, as it could go to b4 at some point as well, giving me even more flexibility.
So from a nothing position, all of a sudden you're actually making progress.
Just a smidge. And that's all you need, because then my opponent has this reaction b4. So, okay, well let's start eyeing the a pawn. And now that itch, he's had the ability to play knight d5 for so long, and that's the imbalance I've been waiting for the entire game. He hits the pawn. I go, okay, it's no problem. And this position is equal, but I am going to grind forever and make an opponent work in this position. Okay. I'm going to play this absolutely forever and ever and ever. Rook a4, tickle on the pawn. And it's amazing all these defensive moves are happening by white for an equal position.
Yeah. Like, you're just completely aggressive here. All active.
And I'm just gradually, like, that's going to be the great thing about this knight. I can poke and prod and just keep trying different things just to see if he'll blunder, just to see if he'll change the position and make it worse for himself. So I just do that. King f8. Notice I'm not moving any pawns. This may very well be one of those positions where I'm going to take every advantage of the 50-move rule. I'm going to play 49 moves of stuff before I make a change, because I am going to do everything within my power to win this game. I want it. I need it.
I had the tendency to move the knight though instead of the king. Is the knight just well placed there?
The knight is well placed, keeping an eye on b5 and d5, because the b5 pawn is the only weakness.
Okay.
And I'm moving the king because there's a good chance that that pawn could become weak in some scenarios.
Okay.
So I just wanted the king there to hold the pawn just in case.
Okay.
I've got the time. You use the time.
Gotcha.
Rook a3, very simple. Keeping an eye on the f pawn so white can't really improve his king. And it's trying to encourage him to play a move like f4, which in turn would weaken the structure overall.
Okay.
So just, just poking. That's all. Poking the position a bit. King e8. Now, because the action's happening on this side of the board, and white, even though they're isolated, still has a 2-to-1 advantage, I want my king on the side of the board just to make sure I don't have any problems in the future.
Patience is ridiculous.
King d7. And now, this is where I gave up a lot of my advantage, but it's still, it's been equal. It's equal, but it feels better for black. We'll put it that way.
Spain.
f6 is a move I would probably play today that makes much more sense. And you go knight a6, and we have this kind of back and forth, but again, I'm going to keep pressing.
Right. Spain Aleph says, keep working until he blunders.
Oh, absolutely. That is the philosophy here. And is that not always the philosophy in chess, though?
That's true.
That could definitely, you could coin that quote right now. Keep working until he blunders. And
put that on a shirt, sell it.
Rook 3 to a6. And I think I would probably be more likely to play like Rook a7 or something before that move today, because maybe I'm looking at knight a8 to b6 to try to get a key square. But the knight's still great here. So no hurry, no rush. So he puts his bishop on the square. I go, okay, I'm going to control what's going on. And maybe at some point I'll have the potential to play d5. Say, okay, I'm not letting you have the c file for free. And trading a set off does not hurt me because if we get to a pure knight versus bishop ending, he's going to be in trouble again. So I'm okay with trading some rooks off.
All right.
Knight a6 gives a tickle to the b pawn, and then that's where we're starting to see more and more problems develop here. He should definitely go with a3, but now I'm going to go knight b8, and he's got to find this critical move, rook c3. If you can't find this move, you're busted.
Mhm.
And my opponent definitely missed this in his calculation. Knight c6, king e3, and then f6 is a roughly equal position again.
Oh, this
But
is
of
not the main
course,
game. Okay.
what am I going to do? I'm going to keep pressing. In the main game, he played rook b2, and I clipped the pawn. I had calculated bishop takes e6. So let me ask you what your evaluation of this position right here is, Matt.
Well, black is up a passed pawn, so it seems like black should be winning.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are a lot of pawn islands, and I'm not exactly sure. But I mean, black's rook is super strong, also preventing the king from moving around. So I don't know if I'm being biased because it's your game, but
If you had to put a number on it,
oh gosh, minus 2.3. I don't know.
it is north of 5.
Oh goodness God.
That's how winning it is. Right.
Okay.
So it's kind of ridiculous when you look at it that way.
I don't see a rook. Oh my goodness gracious.
My opponent, though, after knight takes b4,
Mm-hmm.
went f4. And I think he was so upset about losing the first pawn
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
that Dropskis, and that's all she wrote. So it was an intense game because I had to win to stay in contention.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up finishing in second place that year. So I did not retain my title, but I needed this win very badly in order to stay in contention. And I needed the money in the time period too. So second place was a decent little chunk of change.
Mm-hmm.
So it ended up working out with me putting in the work in this game to get the job done. So yet another game where my opponent played quite well and I had to work. So we've got about 10 minutes left, but I don't know how your time is, but this last game is another technical affair, a lot like this one.
Okay, I am more than happy to see some more if you got the time too.
All right, so let's go ahead and do game 3 then. And I was playing white in that game, a little bit of a change of pace.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this was the first time I had played my opponent. I know we played 2 games, and it's going to be another English. And we'll just kind of go to the point to where it's a symmetrical English. Nothing really to see here. And right here, if you're going to play the symmetrical English with black, you absolutely have to understand the plan here. Because much like the previous position we were looking at when I had black playing the black side of an English, if you mess this up, you get a really passive and miserable position. It's one of the reasons I play the English a lot. So probably one of the more dynamic choices here for black is the move knight g4. Simply putting pressure on d4. And when white plays e3, we go for this sacrifice type idea to get more play. And this is an interesting position. Or you can go with the immediate d6. Because we get this type of idea again with, say, bishop h3
Mm-hmm.
and takes. And for the price of a pawn, you get Binko Gambit style play. So that's another dynamic way to play for black. The main line is taking on d4, and then going d6 with the idea of eventually a6, rook b8, bishop d7, and b5. So that is the absolute main line for black. So my opponent probably understood that the plan is b5 at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And he plays the move a6 here. But a6 is actually dead lost. And
just from one, okay.
When I show this position, this is a positional opening trap. You don't get these very often, so I like to show this type of game. And I've actually played 3 games against players who are above 1850, and my opponent in this game is roughly a little over 2,000.
Okay.
And he might as well resign here. Like I'm just saying it's that bad for black because of c5.
Okay.
This move is a positional squeeze unlike no other. So let's see if just the options to understand what's going on. Well, when he plays a6, his idea is to play b5.
Mm-hmm.
So if you touch your b or d pawn right now, I'm going to take on c6 and win a pawn. So you can't touch either the b pawn or the d pawn. So if you can't touch the b pawn or the d pawn, how is this bishop going to get developed? And if you take, well, it develops my queen in the center, and you still can't play b6 or d6. You play b6, you lose a pawn, and if you play d6, I take. And if we trade a bunch, you get an isolated pawn that I can easily go bishop f4, rook d1, rook d2, rook a d1, and that pawn's lost.
I don't.
So if you're not getting the point, no matter what black does here, he's lost. You will go down material, and it's just going to be a matter of technique for white.
I'll try to bounce off your other variations. Just play knight g4 and sack the pawn with d6.
Okay.
That's the only thing I could think of to try and make some sort of counterplay happen.
if knight g4 immediately, I think we can go with the same type of idea that we saw my opponent do in the last game with knight c2.
Okay.
And he's still having trouble trying to move in the center, and then say on d6, which is probably still objectively the best move.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how he handles it, I'm going to be able to play against this isolated pawn, and this is a dream position.
Yikes! Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the follow, Dewberry Jam. Hope you're really enjoying this. I totally am. If you got some questions,
yeah, absolutely.
Feel free to ask.
And thank you guys for joining in. If you have any questions, please. We haven't had any questions yet pop up, but I'm happy.
Yep, I'm just trying to make something.
You guys
ask some stuff. Like so stupid, you know. Actually.
Oh no, I mean I love the questions. It helps and it makes it more instructive.
Mm-hmm.
So c5, and my opponent he plays e5, and I mean I can't blame the man. He's got to make a move, but e5 is just positionally a nightmare because it's gonna hem in that g7 bishop forever and ever and ever. So knight b3, and my opponent plays b5. This isolates the a pawn. His bishop's bad positionally. So now we want to maximize our position.
Okay.
So first, I'm going to go bishop e3, and the queen really doesn't have a good square. So she returns back home.
Where does black put their d pawn?
Where does black put their anything? You can't even touch the d pawn due to the knight.
Yeah, the knight.
And if you try to go bishop b7, I can go like knight c5, and just it's continual pain. And then on top of it, since he's played e5 and his queen's on d8, now I get the idea that I want to play bishop g5 and knight d5.
Mm-hmm.
But if I play bishop g5 immediately, he can go h6. And I want to keep him in a bind. So I first go queen d2, so there's not going to be any h6. When he goes bishop b7, I was like, okay, I could go knight c5, but he'll go rook b8. And like I said, I want to keep him in a bind. So I go bishop g5 with the pin. And when he goes knight a5, I have to do the calculation here. I'm like, okay, so if I let him trade a few pieces, he could get out of the mess.
Mhm.
But I can still keep all the tension. And if he takes here, that's just going to develop my rook to attack his weak a pawn. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to go knight d5 anyway. And that's going to force his hand to liquidate. And what do we end up getting but the pair of Bs in an open position, and we're going to run a clinic in this position. So
That's
we're giving
incredible.
a little tickle to the rook. So rook b8, and I don't really know what he could do. He can't really hold the a pawn. So and there goes the first one.
I'm just speechless. This is like all of a sudden
And
just
then,
transitions into black has nothing.
oh yeah, I mean c5, and like I said, you can resign. Rook b6, and now I like the tension. The only piece that I don't have working, let's go ahead and get him involved
Mhm.
because black still has no harmony. He's down a pawn, but he might as well be down everything. He can't do anything. So he goes queen c7,
Now,
and
I do have a
Mhm.
question in terms of psychology.
Sure.
Um, as a player who has advantages in many of their games, this would be a position as white where I would start making mistakes. So, what is the best way to go about in these positions to not make mistakes, to just feel comfortable, know that you're okay?
So the question in that situation really is, why would you make a mistake in a completely commanding winning position? Because from my perspective,
Hmm.
when I get this good of a position, I am thinking I'm like reveling in it. I want to play the absolute best moves that I can to not give away my advantage. I mean, my opponent has had to use gobs of time, so it's a game in 60, and I've got 50 minutes on my clock, and he's already down to like 15 or 20 minutes. He's
Okay.
just suffering. So I've got time to think and try to play perfect chess.
Okay.
And I want to be able to have a stream like this and show a game that I'm proud of with the level of play and execution after the positional opening trap.
Okay. I get.
So I think the to answer the question directly, you've really, really, really got to focus on quality play and
Okay.
hold yourself to that high standard once you get the better position.
Got it. I think in these positions, I feel rushed to win the game, if that makes sense. Feels kind of arrogant.
Absolutely. And like you saw in the last game,
Hmm.
is rushing going to be the answer?
No.
You even in an equal position, I'm pressing by not doing much and
Right.
giving my opponent more chances to go wrong. So here I see that his queen moving has finally unpinned this knight.
Hmm.
And the engine disagrees with my decision, but I feel from a technical standpoint, I saw how I was going to win the game by liquidating here.
Okay.
And I stand by my decision. Takes, takes, and now simply the weakest pawn that I can get to is on d7.
Hmm.
Rook d1. No rush. And compare bishops. Even though it's a bishop of opposite color situation, since his bishop's hemmed in by his pawn, it can't put pressure like my bishop is on him.
Hmm.
So the next few moves, like I was really happy with my technique. Rook d8's pretty logical because he's just holding on to the pawn. And this next move, I was particularly proud of when I found it over the board
Okay.
because I was noticing a theme. With the strong bishop on d5, the f7 pawn is pinned. And it's like, okay, I'm going to put my queen on d3. And then I'm going to play h4 because a normal reaction after h4 is to play h5, and then I'll be able to win that pawn.
Hmm.
So it's just, queen d3 is an innocuous looking move,
Yeah, I
but
was.
it's subtle.
My natural instinct was to play e4 or something there, but that would completely shut down this idea.
Right. So queen c5,
Hmm.
h4, And my opponent doesn't go for it, but still,
Oh,
h4
wow.
is nice because at some point h5 could be critical.
None of your pieces are endangered. This is incredible. What?
So yeah, it's just nothing doing, and I'm not worried about trades.
Uh-huh.
I have the ability to drop my bishop back to c4 if I so choose to shut him down, and that's what I do. So now he's got to defend the pawn again.
And then just
So
keep going.
we want to improve the pieces, so queen e4.
Mm-hmm.
And my idea was if it was my move again, I could simply play b4. And he can't take because I have the bishop takes f7 threat. And now I'm going to start moving my passed pawns. And I've got him tied up, and I've optimized my position.
Mm-hmm.
So queen e7, b4 anyway. King f8, and the pawn marches on.
Mm-hmm.
Anchoring the bishop. No weaknesses, no problems. He gets in h5, and now let's go ahead and hit a weakness. Queen b7. Just applying some more steady pressure.
Okay.
Queen e7, so I've got him tied up. Now, notice what I do with this stutter step. At first, I'm attacking the pawn, but look, his only good piece is his queen, right? So with queen b7, queen e7, I retreat the queen to d5. Now my queen is improved over when it was on e4, and his queen is stuck to defending this pawn so he doesn't get mated. So these little
Positional
stutter
squeeze.
steps
Oh my goodness.
is how, this is that Karpovian squeeze. Nothing black can do here. So when your opponent feels that there's nothing they can do, they lash out.
Like G5 or something? Yeah.
Yeah, he's got to do something. Otherwise, you see exactly what's happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, White's playing this game. I mean, I'm just going to push the B pawn home.
Mm-hmm.
It's clean. So he's got to distract me. B6. And after H4, it was when G5 happened was the only time I took a real think in the game.
Okay.
Just to make sure he didn't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
And once I calculated it out and was very happy, then I took, played B7, and now there's a couple of different lines. You have to calculate, like, what if queen G5?
Right.
You can actually take here and then take
Oh my gosh.
and it's a girl. So the other line is bishop takes f2, and he just simply runs out of checks. So when my opponent played queen f6, I was like, okay, I'll just trade queens, and now I have a free hand to improve my position again with no risk at all.
Mm-hmm. And you still have the same threat of taking on d7. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So king e7, and now rook a6. So I have the idea of rook a8 potentially.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good move. And he's threatening the pawn, so let's get the bishop on the most flexible square.
Jesus.
So absolutely the strongest piece. And now rook a4. I needed more flexibility with the rook in case I want to come attack pawns, but at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and get a tempo off the bishop so I'm not losing any time. King g2, starting to bring the king in. I don't like his king thinking about my pawn in that way. Get back. Cement the bishop so he will have no problems in the future, and my king has a direct path into the game.
Mm-hmm.
And the game quickly winds down here as after king e7, nothing doing after rook c8. The position is zugzwang. So it's a feel-good position after you play rook c8 because black can literally move no piece.
Jesus Christ. You don't normally see zugzwang in a position like this. That's awesome.
Right. And this game, from a technical standpoint, from start to finish, was very pleasing to play. and you have a squeeze with the c5. So when you think of like an immortal game or something, it's always that like brutal sacrifices and the position blows up. But positional chess can be just as devastating, and that's why I really, really like this game so much.
Spain LF says he should have resigned after c5 and avoid the 3 hours of struggle.
But then I wouldn't have been able to have all of the sadistic fun, and then that would have ruined it for me.
So, the Mikhail quote that you mentioned earlier, without knights there are no tactics, right?
Yes.
So, the knights came off quite early this game. I'm very impressed with your, like, I was curious how you play in a game without knights, because the more I've worked with you, the more I've seen that your understanding of knight play is just, it's, I can't even describe how strong it is. It's just completely blows my mind.
Well, it's one of those things. It's the transition to different end games, and the more you study certain end games, and the more you get comfortable with it, the better you get. And I think probably my strength as an end game player is when I know I have no risk of losing.
Mhm.
Like the worst thing that could happen from this point with my objective level of play is I'm going to make a draw. If that's the worst case scenario, I start playing at a completely different level at that point.
Okay.
Once I settle in and get comfortable into the game, I'm going to grind forever. And that definitely comes from the hours and hours and hours I've spent studying the games and annotations of Karpov and Ulf Anderson. And those are two great players that have such amazing technique. When they just have a little bit to work with, they will squeeze a guy forever. And games that say, you can look in the database and towards the later part of his career, Ulf Anderson, he would play some line that trades queens like before move 10,
Mhm.
and most grandmasters would play that to offer a draw and split prize money, and he's playing that to just get a game and then grind forever and ever and ever, and he'll beat his young esteemed opponent because the guy's thinking the entire game, why don't we just make a draw, and Ulf's trying to win the entire time.
Yeah.
So back to the concept of psychology of competition, how bad do you want it?
Well, you want it pretty darn bad here. Just like, nah, I want it more than you. You'll see.
And squeeze, 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 pop.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and clip the "It's a Girl" part. We're going to post that everywhere. I love that quote. We're going to use that, put it on everything. Wow, thank you so much, Bryan. I really appreciate you helping fill in on this Thursday, as I wasn't able to successfully get that one. But we do have the following weeks. Next week, if I'm not mistaken, I have it written down somewhere, but we got more Masters coming up this week, all from Florida, by the way. And yeah, so go ahead and stay tuned on Thursday, 7 p.m. to check them out as well. And we will be posting these on YouTube for Palm Beach Chess. Go ahead and check us out on there too. You're going to find a lot of awesome material, especially by this guy right here, who has written a lot of opening repertoire. If you are looking into sharpening your current one or maybe looking for something new, he also has authorship in Chessable, one of the up-and-coming websites for learning opening theory. So yeah, thank you again, Bryan. Do you have any final words here for tonight?
Not much. I mean, we've got a lot of things that we do. If you enjoyed this content, I mean, definitely check out our YouTube, check out Chessable, and check out Patreon. We have different content on all the sites, and we have free content on all of them. And of course, the paid content, not to toot the horn, but people seem to like it. Check it out if you have interest, especially on Chessable. We have the short and sweet courses. The Master of the French Defense is in a short and sweet format, which is free. So is the Alekhine Defense, as well as the Aggressive Queen's Gambit Decline, my recent text on the Janowski variation. And if you're looking for that, solid but savory with dangerous in the position, little bit of salty sweet, if you will, definitely check it out. I think you'll enjoy it.
Very modest saying that some people seem to like it when you have a 4.6 rating on some of those books there.
Yeah, 4.6 out of 5.
Right. It's okay, guys.
It's not terrible. It's not terrible.
All right. You guys have a wonderful night. Go ahead and come in tomorrow on Friday. We're going to have something interesting for you. We definitely